Hi, good Saturday afternoon to everybody. It is April the 15th, and I wanted to do this video. Really, it grabs or captures several others, including the Monty Show, Crystal Ball from Sikkim 365, discussing the media scenario, why the Pac-12 media scenario is in such dire straits, and basically why I believe Colorado and Arizona will be joining the Big 12 2024. I don't know about others. Of course, I think if those two join, I believe Arizona State won't be far behind. And I don't know about Utah. You know, if those three leave, would Utah still be willing to stick with the Pac-12 that's been decimated? Knowing that Oregon and Washington will be leaving as soon as they get the invite from the Big Ten? I don't know, but here's the crystal ball folks here, Brian Etheridge and Mr. Bradshaw, discussing the TV deal and the media and analyzing the media rights and why the PAC is in such dire straits. And then after them, Monty and a little bit from the Talent Wars, and then back to Monty. So have a good listen to this, and we'll follow up.
It seems every single week somebody's putting up an article around this time of year. This league distributed this, or this league expects to get this on their TV deal. But the exposure is another big aspect of it. And from here, we're going to go at it from two angles. One, are you on networks that people can find? And two, how effectively are you able to present some windows that could reasonably expect to get high viewership, which for the purposes of this exercise was the median expected viewership for that window, 2 million or more.
Okay.
So with that said, are you on networks where you can reasonably expect decent viewership? Which for these purposes, that's your network stations.
That's your CBS, your Fox, your ESPN, your ABC.
Well, CBS, Fox, NBC, ABC.
Yeah.
And then the prominent ESPN cable stations of ESPN and ESPN2.
FS1.
And then FS1 and ESPN, you do perform a little more poorly, but they're still very widespread and very well traveled. And then to a much lesser extent, you have the Pac12 Network, which has under 20 million subscribers. And I saw one article cite John Wilner that they had under 15 million subscribers, which is not the same level of exposure.
I've seen 19 million. You know, John cites 15. I've seen 19. So let's just call it under 20.
It probably depends on the year. So without further ado, let's jump in. The next in line appears to be Brett Yormark's masterstroke of renewing with ESPN and Fox right before the economy turned south. So, but for Fox and CBS and NBC and all these other companies, you've got seriously changed contracts. For instance, with the Big Tens, putting Fox at noon, NBC in the afternoon,
or in the
night, and CBS in the afternoon.
Yeah.
There's, I don't want to say a non-compete, but as far as network games go, Fox can't put another Big Ten game on
FS1 during that time.
And that leaves that Fox afternoon slot wide open for the Big 12, which is what I've projected.
Correct.
And changes like that across the board. And then realities from what we've heard in different contract negotiations, such as we saw Brett McMurphy confirm that Fox is not currently acting as a bidder in the Pac-12.
Correct.
So I can't copy what the Pac-12 had for 2022 because there is an awful lot of Fox in FS1. That would not be remotely close to what we're hearing reported.
The windows are just not there for the PAC. The Big 12 took those windows that were available to the Big 10 and the SEC. I mean, the SEC and the Big 12 will have some competing windows inside ESPN.
But Fox is not the changer.
Correct. Fox is completely into the Big 12 at this point.
Right.
With the possible 2:30 and 6:30 slot that they can use that.
With that afternoon slot, the S2 slot, the 2:30 Central slot, you're talking basically all 14 weeks of the season. Mm-hmm. You've got a game. And that's probably going to go the Big 12's way every week. Primetime slot, you're only talking about somewhere like 7 or 8 games, 6, 7, 8 games a year, because the other weeks, you've got MLB contracts that are taking priority over any college.
All the way mid-October, late October.
Right. So early in the season, they'll have a couple weeks they'll miss. Then there'll be a block in October they'll miss. But it comes out to 14 for the afternoon slot, and then 6 to 8 for later.
For the rest of the Big 12, get ready to have some 11 o'clock FS1 games, some 11 o'clock ESPN and ESPN2 and U games.
But it's still good exposure. And getting more into the percentages, you're talking in terms of network percentages, you've got at least 18% from Fox alone. And then, assuming you were somewhat consistent with what you had on ABC for the conference,
correct,
you're talking minimum low 20s percentages, which is pretty good compared to some of the other conferences we're going to go through. And then after that, you're going to have a lot of FS1, ESPN, to a lesser extent, ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPNU. But, the streaming percentage in the Big 12, it's like maybe 1.5, 2 games per school.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's going to be about, 26-ish%. So it's a chunk, but it's also the weakest chunk. And what that means is that over 70% of your games are widely available. Nobody's having to hunt for it, and you're drawing in a lot of casual viewership. When 70+% of your games are widely available, and when only a small chunk is streaming, and you're presumably getting, at minimum, a very good afternoon slot from Fox and potentially some primetime games there before you get into the giant knife fight that every conference has for attention on ABC and ESPN, you've got a pretty good exposure situation to start with. Now, getting into the final Power 5 conference that we're going to discuss is the Pac-12. Now, before this current round of contract negotiations, and you go back to the deal that Larry Scott was able to strike for their rights outside of the Pac-12 network.
Correct.
With Fox and ESPN, where they had to team up to avoid NBC and at the time Versus from moving in on college football at the time in a much more seller's market for television rights. You had 55% of their games were highly visible on an ABC ESPN network or a Fox FS1 network. And they had about 20% of that was ESPN or ESPNU, now heavily slanted to the S4 after dark slot, late night slot.
I mean, they would get a 7 or 5 o'clock Central and a 7 o'clock Central. I mean, they were getting 9 p.m. and 7 o'clock Pacific. I mean, so we're getting 9 o'clock games and sometimes 10 o'clock late start games for them.
Which is a really good low floor, but also low ceiling television window. You're not going to drop 5 million viewers in a game like that, even with some of your best matchups. And if you do, it's a one-off. The issue they're running into here is with Fox not at the table. And assuming ESPN keeps their inventory demands the same, which they may or may not want to, depending on how much cost cutting they're having to do due to Iger's comments and due to the economy. But for the purposes of this exercise, I kept it level with what they have. Now it just projects to about 31% of their games being that highly visible on ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, and presumably the gap in the inventory would be made up either by a streamer or by Pac12 Network. I mean, before I think I had it about 45% was on Pac12 Network, and I don't pretend to know how that contract is structured, but if they're trying to get some return out of it, I don't see how they do that by pulling inventory away from the network. So, they may have a majority linear deal if the Pac-12 network is considered linear, but in terms of reach, it's anything but comparable to what you get from the other league networks, or even at ESPNU, which I think the most recent number I saw for them was 44 million. You're talking 1/3 of ESPNU.
And so this is when we start talking about that. So between 15 to 20 million on the Pac-12 network. When you do that, you disappear.
Right.
And what we've been hearing, like President Robbins from Arizona saying they're going to get 50% linear, is that 50% on the Pac-12 network? If that is, you still disappear. There's still no distribution of it unless you have somebody stepping up. And I think that's where when McMurphy came out with the ION piece, because they have 61 million homes.
Right, but is ION going to solve that potential exposure problem?
I didn't know Ion existed. I knew Scripps existed
Yeah.
as a company, but I didn't know Ion as a channel existed. And they're on YouTube TV. I found them.
Right.
When I was looking,
I'm not saying it's not available, but more precisely, is the average college football fan going to find you?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be available, but they happen to miss it the way a lot of these regional syndication deals can potentially have that happen?
Yeah. It just tanks off like you can't believe.
Well,
So
yeah. You're talking two really well-known cable networks and CBS.
I mean, it's great. We got to watch Baylor, UC Santa Barbara, and then no one else did. No one watched it because they're watching on CBS. Because
right.
I mean, does True TV and even have it
network,
at the bar?
I don't know. Matters. But either way, it's going to be a difficult situation exposure-wise, because unless you get a CBS, an NBC, or a Fox back at the table, or unless ESPN just says, hey, I'll give you a whole bunch of TV windows. Because even if they kept it level with what they had before, which, they're in cost-cutting mode. I don't know if you can count that as a given, even though there's a good chance it could happen. It's going to be a difficult puzzle to fit.
Yep.
And complicating that is some of the contracts these networks have with other leagues.
AAC, first of all.
AAC, Mountain West, Sunbelt, MAC, CUSA.
And you're starting to see the Pac-12's issue here in their media deal. They're trying to get done now because they are trying to hodgepodge everything together from what we're hearing. And so that when you start talking about CUSA getting out of all that, and then everyone else doing these things, and the windows just keep closing and closing and closing on them. So that's
right.
So as a conclusion, like you're talking about, Big Ten killed it.
Well,
right.
A conclusion on this portion of it, yes. Yeah. In terms of what networks you're on, the Big Ten, and to a lesser extent, the SEC killed it. The most widely visible, most widely available. I mean, other than like 14% of the SEC, everything is on a channel that most cable packages will have.
Yeah.
And from there, casual viewership is going to be very, very common for all those games. Now, in my opinion, in terms of exposure, you can make an argument for the ACC, but I think the Big 12, because FS1, ESPN, ESPN2,
and Fox.
ESPNU, those cable channels are far more likely to be visible than the ACC network, because even if it's on that many television homes, it's on that sports tier in terms of the numbering system. It's not where everybody knows to immediately channel surf to.
Yeah.
So the Big 12, you got 75% of your games at least that are going to be highly visible, or roughly that many. And you're also getting a lot more games on ABC and Fox combined than the ACC really will probably get on ABC.
Okay.
The Pac-12, their whole situation is their best bet for a major linear player right now is ESPN, and everybody's on ESPN. And as I mentioned before, it's kind of a knife fight for who gets the big spotlight windows on ABC and ESPN, the two channels in their fleet that will give you the platform for some good ratings.
But we've seen several reputable people come out and say, ESPN's out. Fox is out.
I've seen ESPN out being more of a rumor at this point, but Fox, you've seen Dennis Dodd. You've seen Brett McMurphy.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
you've seen Marshawn Oren. You've seen a lot of these guys come out and say that.
Marshawn and Oren are the ones that are saying where they believed ESPN had backed away. And
if that happens, that's going to be very big trouble for the PAC.
That pushes them almost to Apple.
Right. And you can potentially sub-license games then, but
yeah.
At that point, you don't really have a minimum for what needs to be on what channel. You don't really have any guarantee of any windows, which, I mean, presumably if they're buying your games, they have a plan for them. But you don't know if that plan is, we've got dead air on this obscure channel, or if, oh, wow, this is a really big game, I want to put it on ABC.
Yeah.
Or I want to put it on Fox.
And
you just don't know.
Who is going to buy it. You don't know who that sub-licensee. And that's where I think, again, we talked about the Ion stuff coming up, 60 million homes. But it's one of those things you can see it. I don't really think Ion is that big of it, but the interview with their president or their VP, he admitted they were talking, and they wanted to do things like putting betting lines next to the game and like looking ahead, and that could be a future thing. I mean, that could be.
And I'm sure there's a lot of innovative ideas, but in terms of just the exposure piece here,
mm-hmm.
you need some widely available windows where college football fans know to go, or else it's just going to be your diehards going. It reminds me in 2013, I think FS1 was in year one, and then there was some backup of a game ahead of it, and I think Texas Tech Oklahoma had to be on Fox News.
Correct.
For the better part of like 20 minutes or something like that. You can't tell me they got good viewership for that interruption because it's so far off the beaten path.
Yeah.
Now, the other half of what we're dealing with here is the number of windows that you would reasonably expect to get at least 2 million. Now, the way I did this in my prior articles in prior years, I broke down the different television windows: noon, afternoon, prime, and late, and then by channel. And then I gave a list of median, middle value figures for what the games in several years of my data produced. If that window produced 2 million plus, it's included on this list. If it didn't, it's not. So these are the windows where if you have a really big game, you could potentially expect it to go really big. And from there, the Big Ten is absolutely killing it. They're in the lead. They have a narrow edge over the SEC because you've got 43 games. It's either 13 or 14. I think it's 14 games each for each of the three networks that
you got 14
have stacked their Saturdays.
Correct.
Plus the conference title game.
Correct.
And while they don't get any of those windows from Big Ten Network or FS1, that's just an awful lot. And those are not small windows. Those are windows that are not just hitting the 2 million, they're exceeding it. You know, so from that level of exposure, they're going to be in good shape. Now, the SEC, you know, ESPN is paying so much for them. If they have an excuse to put them on ABC or ESPN, which, 15 games they purchased specifically from CBS,
correct,
those are almost certain to go on ABC.
ESPN, ABC, yeah.
Those are almost certain to go on ABC. And then after that, with Texas and Oklahoma joining, even after you account for a percentage of SEC games going to the SEC network and to the one game per team that has to go to ESPN Plus, after that, they're still going to try and push another couple ones.
Yeah.
However, the percentage of the total inventory of games that you have is actually less because ABC, ESPN, I think, had 27 games for the Big Ten. So they're about 6 down from where they were.
So we're talking probably 40-45% of the Big Ten in that 2 million range, or just under 40% for the SEC. Big 12 then comes in around 26-27% at the 2 million range.
Yeah, Big 12's kind of around mid to low 20s because you've got that Fox afternoon window.
Correct.
And you've got at least a portion of the primetime Fox windows.
Yeah.
And then you got to assume with ABC getting the top pick every week, you're going to get at least some of those ABC and ESPN windows that clear that threshold.
Yeah.
Now, after that, you've got the ACC.
Yes.
And they're in a big fight to try and get these windows because everybody's on ABC, ESPN, but they're doing a pretty good job of it. And their percentage of these big windows on ABC, ESPN is probably higher than the Big 12s. They just don't happen to have Fox or somebody else helping them out because ESPN owns everything.
Yeah.
Then next you have Notre Dame, where 6 of their games per year are going to be on NBC. I think one, whatever their equivalent of the ESPN Plus game is, goes to Peacock, which is NBC's streaming service.
Yeah.
Then next, I have the American.
Yes.
And they don't have a huge deal, but you've got at least a few windows that get on ABC or ESPN because, not necessarily because, and I got into this when Stuart Mandel was trying to say the AAC was more valuable than the Big 12. Newsflash, realignment proved that not to be true.
Not to be true, no.
But beyond that, they have a lot of low competition windows. So Black Friday windows, things like that got slotted their way. And then I have the Pac12, assuming it's an ESPN and streaming deal, because without Fox there, and that's not to say they couldn't exceed Notre Dame in the American, but I don't think they're catching the ACC.
No, not at this point. No.
Just with how, one, they're not play in that noon slot.
Correct.
So that's one entire list of big windows that they're not even a contender for unless you want to completely cannibalize your ticket sales.
Or you start turning a 9 a.m. game in the Pacific time. That just doesn't happen.
Right. And then you're in such a competition for those windows, and that's your only way to get that level of exposure. Yep. So it's going to kind of cap them on that.
Yeah.
And then, but they are slightly ahead of the Mountain West, which has a certain minimum I think they hit with CBS and Fox as part of those deals. And then from there, it really shows a pecking order on both fronts. You've got the Big Ten and SEC are way out in front of everybody.
Correct.
And then the Big 12 and to a lesser extent the ACC are right behind them. And then everybody else is trying to carve out what they can find.
Yeah. The PAC in this is they are, predominantly dependent on Oregon to pull those numbers too. All their top-rated games in those slots, or Oregon versus whoever.
True. Oregon is the biggest bell cow there, but I do believe if a school like Washington
would Washington,
you would have that potential.
Correct.
And now that Dion's in place, Colorado could potentially do that.
They have to win.
True. The viewership expectation for Oregon, if they're going 5-7, is quite different than what they've been doing for most of the last 20 years.
I agree.
But aside from that it's just an interesting breakdown that I don't think got enough discussion with how much everybody focuses on the payout, but our team's going to be able to be seen.
Yes, 100%. Brian Etheridge, Sam Bradshaw, Signal 365, just breaking down the data.
You know what's interesting? Brett Yormark was asked about leaving money on the table in the Big 12.
Certainly didn't leave any money on the table. As you're reading now, the media landscape's changing. The big media companies are really more focused on what they need versus what they want. I think we're reading about that every day. It's a changing landscape. When I was in Phoenix, everyone was there talking to the media partners. Think about UFC being out there right now, the NBA, CFP, WWE. It's a crowded space right now. And by going early, I was able to gain the attention of arguably two of the biggest media brands in the world. And they saw our vision. They realized where we were going. They liked it, and they doubled down on us. So for all the right reasons, we went early. And I think that decision today is looking even better and better as we move forward. 100%.
These media deals, the Pac-12 has been out there in the marketplace trying to get its media deal done, that there's only so much shelf space in the TV world. There's only so many TV slots on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Friday or a Thursday. And once those slots are gone, then there's no more shelf space. And so you kind of had to beat other people to a spot in order to secure that shelf space. You did a great job on that.
100%.
To me, when I hear, hey, ESPN and the Pac-12 have had renewed conversations this week, I guess I'm not surprised. But nothing's really changed.
Then you get this news that the Pac-12 wants $400 million in total compensation.
What are you doing?
Which is also a big reason that the CW and the Pac-12 are dead. This is a big deal with people now reporting that, hey, Colorado could jump at any moment. I just feel like we're in a situation where you don't have a way out if you're the Pac-12 now. As we've reported for months on this show, that there is no deal that does not involve ESPN. That's the only avenue. And if our sources at ESPN and in the TV networks are correct, the TV industry, are correct, that ESPN's not willing to crack the $90 million mark, $9 million a year per school from ESPN is not worth doing a deal on.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's a non-starter. There's no way to spin that to Arizona and Arizona State, and there's no way to spin that to Colorado, who allegedly is already looking to pull the ripcord. ESPN has no need to buy the programming, and certainly no need to overpay to buy a product that they frankly don't need.
100%.
So as you can see, the situation is why we see the PAC having such difficulty with completing any kind of media deal. The TV market is just flooded. It's like the guy behind me over here talking about the shelf war, the fact that there's no shelf space, and there's just no room. So even if they get ESPN, like Monty says, is not going to give them a lot of money for a few slots. And truthfully, that's if they can, like the other guy said, win the knife fight to get into those ESPN ABC slots. So it's an uphill battle at best, and really truly dire. So I just wanted to leave you guys with kind of why I believe Colorado will be joining the Big 12. So have a good one. We'll see. Monday's meeting is at closed doors, but on April 27th, the Colorado will be having a public meeting. Arizona will also be having multiple public meetings. We'll see. By the end of April, we probably will know a whole lot more about where these teams will be landing, or at least feeling more pressure with the fact that the PAC still doesn't have a deal. Have a good one, guys. Please press like and subscribe. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you later.
Big 12 open for business.
There is no doubt the Big 12 is open for business. We will leave no stone unturned to drive value for the conference.